You've seen the label and the accolades.
The winner of Winery of the Year is Yarra Yering.
This is an outstanding wine.
This wine is a dream.
I just think that Sarah Crowe, the winemaker, is just she's an absolute wizard.
Now it's time to meet the winemaker. It's the wizard herself, Sarah Crowe from Yarra Yering. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's all an accident, apparently, you becoming a winemaker?
It's true, yeah. A happy accident.
Very happy accident. Can you take us back to the story of how Sarah Crowe ended up at one of Australia's most iconic wineries?
I guess it goes all the way back to when I left school and I liked being outside and getting my hands dirty. So I studied horticulture, worked in garden centres, so recommending plants for a shady corner, whatever you were after. Eventually I kind of went overseas, so quit my job. And when I came back, I kind of needed some work. And when I was overseas, I'd seen my first vineyard. It was autumn, so it caught my eye. It was really pretty. And I started to think maybe I can work in a vineyard when I get home. So eventually I called Brokenwood just saying, I would like to work in your vineyard. And they just said, it's pruning, which is a pretty rubbish job, to be honest. It's cold. It's pruning, so come on up. And so I went for 5 weeks. 5 months later, popped into the winery to help out during harvest and never left.
Wow.
Yeah.
If you could do the pruning job, then you would do any other job, right?
Yeah, that's right. Or picking, probably even worse than pruning.
You've brought in a great lineup for us today. Can you take us through what you've brought in? And then also, I mean, I know what we're going to be trying, but what is the first glass that we're going to be trying these Sarah Crowe works of?
So these are all from the beautiful 2021 vintage. It's a real highlight in my winemaking career, I would say, as an overall vintage. It's not often that you're happy with everything in a season, and 2021 delivered us that. I thought we'd start with Chardonnay.
That's sick.
Yeah, and most people know Yarra Yering for red wines, and not that many people really do know that we produce a little bit of white wine, and most of that being Chardonnay.
Chardonnay and the Semillon. But then I like, for example, the Dry White Wine No1, which is Chardonnay and Semillon, never occurred to make a Bordeaux white, actually, with Sauvignon Blanc, for example. And why would that be?
Well, the first, in the early years, Dr. Carrodus from Yarra Yering, our founder, was making he just called it dry white, and it was a Semillon and a Chardonnay blend because that's what he had producing on the vineyard. So he just blended them together and made a dry white wine. And then some Sauvignon Blanc he planted came online, and so then he named it Dry White Wine No1 because it was the white partner to the red No1. So it was a Sem Sav for a number of years. And then we didn't make one until 2011. There was a big kind of hiatus because we didn't have those varieties in the vineyard. Came back in 2011 as a Semillon Chardonnay. When I rocked up to Yarra Yering in 2014, I thought, Semillon Chardonnay, why are you doing that? This should be a Sem Sav. That's what people know. That's what they understand. Exactly. But we didn't have the Sauvignon Blanc on the vineyard. So in 14 and 15, I actually bought a barrel of Sauvignon Blanc from across the valley to make that Sem Sav more traditional Bordeaux white. And then right before the 2016 harvest, I did a lineup of 11 to 15, and I decided that I actually preferred the Semillon Chardonnay blends over the Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blends as a drink in the glass. Oh. And therefore we didn't have to go and source fruit outside of the estate, which is more in line with our philosophy. And so, yeah, we've gone back to a Semillon Chardonnay just because it tastes good.
So Dr. Bailey Carrodus, the founder, who we were just speaking about, passed away now. What was something, Sarah, that you admired about his winemaking coming into the position that you went, this is either unique or something you hadn't seen before, or something that you knew as a winemaker you had to keep the tradition of?
I think I'm really, well, first of all, the site that he chose to plant is top notch. I've never worked with a better site. But then the way he set up the winery to basically be able to make everything as a small batch wine because it matched the vineyard and these little plantings of lots of varieties and things like that. The way the winery was set up is that you can actually keep control and make those wines really well. So our fermenters only hold 600 kilos, they're well designed and with proper lids, et cetera, et cetera. The having a small, at the time when I first got there, a basket press was all designed to take these little fermenters. And in the beginning, he set it up like that because he was only going to be one person working in the winery himself. So I wanted to be able to manage it all easily and safely. But, it's a great way to look after these little sections of the vineyard extremely well. It also gives us great scope to do lots of trials and experimentation, whether or not that be in the vineyard or in the winery. So yeah, the little fermenters are pretty special.
Is that the wooden apparatus that I've seen somewhere before? Like it's instead of like the must something, it's like it's a wooden. I don't know. I saw it in a video and I was like, this is interesting.
Yeah, we call them a tea chest fermenter.
Okay.
Because they're modelled and shaped off a tea chest made from plywood because it's waterproof. The early ones were just painted on the inside, but once the vineyard grew and expanded and he had more commissioned, they're all stainless steel lined now. Yep. They look about a metre by metre cube, essentially.
Easy to move around and stuff. Yeah.
Really easy, little pallet jack.
Yeah.
Away you go.
Cool.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love it.
Very cool. And another question, like on so many different varietals, and like if you look at the map of France, you have Burgundy with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, you have Bordeaux with the Bordeaux varietals, you have the Rhône, and all of them are such different climates and different soils. How, like in Yarra Yering, you not too far apart, you grow all those varietals. You grow the whole France almost, in different styles of grapes.
Yeah, just France condensed into
France
90 acres
in Yarra Yering,
Yeah. That's part of what makes the site so special, I think. So within the Yarra Valley, which is a cool climate, we are a warm site, so one of the earlier sites, and that's important for varieties like Cabernet or the Touriga that we have to have that little bit of extra kind of warmth and sunshine. But it also, in a way, probably dictates the style of wines that we make with all of the varieties. But it is special and it is amazing. I can get up and walk from my desk to the boundary of the vineyard, and it takes probably 15 minutes. And I've walked past the Chardonnay, the Pinot, the Shiraz, the Cabernet, and it's all on that site, and amazingly produces beautiful, high quality grapes of all varieties.
Well, this Chardonnay is beautiful. French oak?
All French, yeah. I think with the 2021, it was would have been a little bit under 30% new.
Yep.
Very kind of, I suppose it's one of the styles that's changed with the change of winemakers, and considering that we are a warmer site, I'm working quite hard quite closely with our vineyard manager, Andrew George, to try and really bring a little bit of kind of finesse and I suppose a more minerality and a tightness to the Chardonnay rather than being too ripe, over oaked and too buttery. So we've been working quite hard in the vineyard to make this lovely kind of more mineral, slaty style of Chardonnay.
Yeah, it's beautifully balanced.
More Chablis-like.
Yeah, modern Australian.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And a lovely sense of acid as well, that hit me straight on the front palate.
Definitely.
Like, wow.
Yeah,
beautiful.
And that's been a change. The Chardonnays historically always went through malolactic fermentation to soften the acid, whereas I want to keep that acid and keep the tightness and fineness to it. So we don't do that anymore. So some of these things aren't too complex, but yeah.
Second on the list, from once again the 2021 season and vintage, what have we got?
This is our Agincourt Cabernet Malbec blend. The blend has changed a little bit over the years, but once again, since about 2011, we've stuck to kind of Cabernet Malbec. And for me, I look at Margaret River and what they're doing with Cabernet Malbec blends, and I just think Malbec brings such energy to a Cabernet blend.
Prettiness,
yeah,
floral.
so floral, those beautiful violets. And this,
And the
you know,
color really does reflect that purple Malbec at times as well in the glass.
it sure does. Yeah, it's almost inky, but purple.
I thought when I first met Carlos, I'm like, oh, Cabernet Sauvignon pepper. And Carlos kind of explained to me it might be a bit more of that spearmint essence. And I do get that in this, like that sort of spice that's coming through here from I presume the oak. Is that right? I mean, by the way, Sarah, I'm an idiot.
No, a wine idiot.
Yeah, a wine
not a complete idiot.
Yeah. Maybe in some things. So I basically just kind of riff off what I'm trying to learn. So tell me I'm wrong. But with the spice that I'm getting on the nose, that sort of pepperiness, would that be from the oak for this, or is that the grape style of the Malbec you're growing?
Well, something that distinguishes this Agincourt blend from our Dry Red Wine No1 blend is that that spearmint element that you mentioned. It's that leafy lift, and that's a more kind of blue-red fruit spectrum at the same time. So looking for a lot of like brightness and energy and that lift on the nose. I love a little bit of like kind of with Cabernet, it's really important to distinguish between being herbal and herbaceous. And this one for me has a lovely herbal edge to it, but it's not herbaceous. So herbal, those kind of green notes and lift. Herbaceous though is a little bit kind of hard and drying on the palate. So you want the herbs and that kind of lightness and fragrance. But then this wine doesn't have a lot of new oak as well. So I think some of that spice is just from the fruit and the blend itself. But yeah, for me, it's that lovely, as you say, spearmint floral lift.
For you with the Yarra Yering list and going, being lucky enough to try the number 2 and number 1 up next, do you think your whole selection, like even the Chardonnay in front of us, could go for 10 years in the cellar? And do you think, they're drinkable now, obviously, but would you prefer to be trying these in 10 years to see what their best is?
Well, when a wine is at its best is a very individual kind of response. So one of the reasons why the vineyard there is so special is that we know, because we've got 50-year-old wines in the cellar now, that they do have the legs to mature and give you these wonderful kind of cellared wines, special wines. They maintain their freshness and, the kind of the concentration of fruit, but without being too ripe. But it's that like there's a subtle power to these wines, but it's also the tannin profile and the acidity, which help these wines cellar for a really long time. So they're the components that we want, but you can't have them without beautiful fruitful palate at the same time. We make some wines like this Agincourt to be a little bit more what I call kind of open weave, more accessible, a bit more juicy. So that's why there's not a lot of new oak in this wine. I think it sits at about 10% of this wine. So the oak is just there to complement the fruit. Our old wines in our museum, in our wine archive, if you open one that has had where a cork has done the job it was supposed to do, they're really beautiful and they still have so much fruit weight to them. And that's one of the ways we know that what we're making today, because it's the same site, the same vines, are going to live for a really long time. And in particular now sealed under a screw cap, so it's not the kind of Russian roulette of wine bottles, that we know they're going to be good. The customer's going to get what they want when they choose to open it. When is the right time? It's, I get asked this if I had $1 for every time somebody said, when's the best time to drink this wine? I would be wealthy and no longer a winemaker.
So, and the oak, the oak regime 10% or, 30%, you see that these wines that go onto younger oak, or longer oak for, newer oak, they will have more potential, obviously, for aging, the microoxygenation allowing for the wine to develop much further. Is that really a thing, or do you see that's not with every varietal? How?
I think the longevity of wine really does come down to the quality of the fruit. Then where we push it as far as how much oak we're going to put with it, can impact on it probably more as a young wine than an older wine. So if you took the same fruit, some into old oak, some into newer oak, and bottled them, they're still going to live for the same amount of time. I would just find that the one with a lot of new oak, you wouldn't be able to see the detail in the wine. You wouldn't see. You'd be you risk smothering and masking the wine, but that won't really. It'll add more tannin and more structure to the wine. But the real thing that you want in a wine that's been cellared is that it still has a fruit, a core of fruit. And I think really what we do with them just kind of impacts on them more as a young wine than an older wine.
Let's get into the number 2. And my first question about the number 2 is exactly that, and the number 1. How do you get away with just having such a successful wine without giving away what's in each blend and each vintage?
Back in the day, Doc just had a front label. And it had the alcohol and preservative added, Dry Red Wine No2.
Yeah.
I still have those at View de Monde, we still have those old labels.
Yes.
They look
you
so
would have
good
some.
now, so old, like rusty, the label almost
stained. Loved.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we keep them on a special
They're in plastic? Are they wrapped in plastic?
They're wrapped
preserve
in
the
plastic
bottle,
as
the
well
label?
to preserve the label. And they're on a special part actually of the cellar.
Oh,
so
got their own little space.
they
That's
have actually,
nice.
yes.
Deserving.
Yeah.
They do, yeah.
I think it's pretty cool because what I like about just saying Dry Red Wine No1 or Dry Red Wine No2, like this one, is you're not giving much information away. So you're really just asking people to think about if they like it or not.
Oh, I like that.
So
Simple as that.
yeah.
Try it. Do you like it?
I mean, today perhaps more people know more about wine and information's so readily available, kind of in the palm of our hand. But let's say back in the day, so 40 odd years ago, it was just like here's a wine. Do you like it? And those numbers really connect the blends back to the blocks on which they were grown, the original blocks around the what was his house, which is now our tasting room, our cellar door. So, yeah, what I like about it is it connects the wine to the land, but it's not telling you too much. And so for Doc, it was just about making 2 different styles of wine. And the Shiraz, the number 2, was this kind of softer, fleshier, it would have been a bit riper style of wine. And then the number 1 was a little bit more austere, more structural, probably more savoury and spice in it as well. So they were the 2 wines he made for a number of years, and just pushed them into 2 different styles based on that. So people just became familiar with them. And, they picked one. Sometimes today I think people buy the number 1 over the number 2 because it's called number 1. They think,
Oh, right.
People as the
in our
association.
mind, subconsciously, it's like, oh, it must be better than the number 2.
Yeah.
But they're different varieties and different styles. Yeah.
I'm going to be honest.
And
I think I thought that.
And really,
I did think that, yeah.
This is a 95 to 96% Shiraz every year, co-fermented with Viognier, and just Viognier skins, and usually sometimes Marsanne, so another white Rhone variety, and also Mataro or Mourvedre is blended into this wine as well.
With somebody, as iconic as Dr. Bailey Carrodus and the Yarra Yering vintage, do you find it difficult to kind of create a Sarah Crowe stamp on what you're doing if you are dealing in small percentiles of change?
I just took it really slowly.
Yeah.
It's funny how people will see a change when it's not even there. By the time we release wines, they're 2 years old. So I'd been there for less than about 6 months, and we were releasing the 2012 vintage.
Oh, which you wouldn't have had hands on.
I didn't make. So, but there's these long loyal customers who came to that release tasting and were looking at me going, the wines are different.
Funny, Sarah. That's really interesting. Perception.
So they were already expecting a change. So in a way, it wasn't that difficult then to start making those small little tweaks and shifts just to try and understand.
Yeah.
In 2014, I didn't make my first vintage, I didn't make many changes. I stuck to the program, you could say. And then I felt like that was part of my learning. I added that to my experience. So then in 2015 was actually when I started to make some little tweaks and, let's back off on the oak. Let's not use as heavy a toast, et cetera, et cetera. But by the time those wines were released, every year those loyal customers who knew the wines in the brand would come along and say, they're a little bit different again. And so it was actually a couple of years before there was a real kind of shift, I suppose, in the style to have the Sarah Crowe stamp. But already people were on this journey, and then they would start to say, yeah, they're different and I like them.
Yeah, another change you made obviously is everything with the screw top. Do you if you have good quality enough cork, would you go back to it? Okay, people still ask, like even in a restaurant sometimes, all the old vintage 1970s, 1980s, 1990s that we have in a restaurant, from Yarra Yering is everything in the natural cork, and they were pretty good corks. I mean, some break and stuff, but the wine is most often sound. Would you go back to it? Like, and what difference does it make for you, other than, of course, having spoiled wine every now and then?
So this is me just being a little bit challenging, but what is good quality cork? How can you tell?
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't matter what you pay for it and how it looks on the outside. It's natural, so every cork is different. I wouldn't. I really am not a fan of cork because I've had so many disappointing wines in my short wine drinking career. And I just think, I don't know how we got to this point where we create so many excuses for cork. If you have a beautiful wine under cork, we will say, oh, that's a good bottle. But why can't they all be good?
Exactly, yeah.
We have the technology. So, it's romanticism, but we don't really accept a failure in our other products based on its packaging the same way we accept it with wine. And we don't have to accept it. And for me, it's the best, screw cap's the best technical closure that we have. For me, it ensures that when the customer does choose to drink the wine, I've done everything in my power to make sure that they're going to enjoy it. So, I think, cork is just romantic, but tipping a wine, an expensive bottle of wine down the sink is not very romantic at all for me.
Insert sound effect post-production. Here it is, everybody. The hero. No, I'm just kidding. The number 2 as well was delicious, but this is the number 1 Yarra Yering, the dry red wine. Was it nerve-wracking heading into becoming the winemaker of such, not only an iconic winery, but just a wine? Was there any sleepless nights along the journey about whether this wine could hold itself for the last 9 years?
For sure. At first, when I accepted the role, I was so excited to be working with the fruit off the vineyard, but then to be the custodian of this brand.
Yeah.
And then I moved down here, and then, everybody kept saying things like, oh, big shoes to fill. Oh, Yarra Yering's for life. It's not just for Christmas. And all of us, slowly, gradually, the weight of, in particular, this blend did start to rest on my shoulders a little bit. I think it's really important to, with the number 2, for instance, the blending happens throughout the year. The parcels that I like, we'll put them together when we move the wine. The number 1, I'm much more likely to keep everything separate. So, that old measure twice, cut once kind of situation.
Great adage to take into this wine.
Yeah. So I was very, very nervous for the first couple of years, for sure, because I wanted, even though people were expecting a little bit of change, I wanted the wines to still feel like Yarra Yering to them. So I think part of that is we're always really Cabernet dominant in this blend. So it's been as low as 55%, but as high as 85%. And I just only know back to, say, 2005. But for me, it's kind of important that the Cabernet leads with this wine, but then everything else just helps smooth it out, fill it out, flesh it out, give it some lift, give it some spice, give it some more layers and complexity. So it's generally between 60 and 70% now, depending on the season.
Amazing. I mean, I think maybe we should touch a little bit on the story as well, no? Of because it's a romantic story with Reggie and Dr. Carrodus. Flipping the coin and a little bit of that story, because I think maybe some people know, but I think a lot of people doesn't know, and I think they should know a little bit about that. I think it's such a cool story to tell.
Yeah. So I guess how was Yarra Yering started? Yeah. Well, Dr. Carrodus had read an article. It was in, I can't remember what paper, but a Melbourne paper, the kind of, letters to the editor type thing. People were complaining about, the growth in wine production and consumption in Victoria. And, it's like the Italians coming to Australia and making wine at home. And Reg Egan of Wanturna Estate fame had written in saying, well, that's ridiculous. No, Reg was reading this, sorry. Reg was reading it. Dr. Carrodus had written and said, don't be so ridiculous, like these Europeans are very civilized and, wine is part of a meal. And Reg thought, oh, this is a sensible bloke. So he wrote to the editor, they passed it on. The time people used to take to have this kind of communication, we wouldn't even think about it these days. It's like, no, I've had a different thought, I'm off, whatever. And then they met for lunch. And they got along really well, and they ended up deciding, Reg already had some vines at Wanturna Estate, but they became good friends, and they decided to plant a vineyard together. And they found the land that Yarra Yering is on. They started planting it. Dr. Carrodus had found an old malt house or something in here, maybe in Richmond somewhere. And
close to our studio.
Yeah. I'm just trying to, I don't want to get that wrong, but it was
Melbourne CBD based.
Yeah. Which they decided would be the winery. And they were, having lunch, having a break of during planting, and they had a little disagreement over who was going to be out at the vineyard and do all the work in, as I was talking about, the heat in summer and picking and the cold in winter and pruning. So who was going to do that and who was going to be in town in the winery making the wines? And Dr. Carrodus, from what Reg says, was like, well, you'll be out here and I'll be in town. And Reg said, no, we'll both be out here, we'll both be in town. And so they had this kind of unfortunate disagreement and decided, Reg was like, well, one of us, no, this won't work. You get to choose if you want to buy me out or want me to buy you out. And he flipped a coin, and Dr. Carrodus won the coin toss. And came back the next day and said, I'll buy you out. So, yeah, I believe they, being such gentlemen, they helped each other finalise the planting of Yarra Yering, and they had ordered vines to expand the planting at Wanturna. So they
both kind of won out a little bit.
Yeah, well, they honoured that to help each other plant the vineyard, and then they parted ways. So
awesome.
Yeah, it all came down to a coin toss.
What a great history.
Yep.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for bringing in these wines. You're right, it's a delicious vintage and it's drinking so well now. I know there is a little bit of stock available. Obviously, the link is going to be in the show notes for people to check out these wines. But a true honor to have you in here and talk about your winemaking style. And I think it's also super important as well to represent women in this industry as well. Coming from two men hosting a podcast, what douchebags. But no, I truly mean it. I think it's amazing to see someone like yourself leading the way in not only just making delicious wines, but in such a great established vineyard, and keep it going. you know, maybe my daughter can take over one day.
Maybe. Thanks for the invitation. I've enjoyed the chat too. So cheers.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you very much.